Good evening, and welcome to this session. On Sunday, 11th October, the world celebrated the International Day of the Girl Child. The British Council is delighted to host Madu Dissanayake, who has generously agreed to help us commemorate the day by sharing her wide experience. Madu is a social anthropologist qualified in the United Kingdom with more than 18 years of post-qualifying experience and expertise. She holds a postgraduate diploma in international relations, a diploma in health promotion, a diploma in early years education, and a certificate on sexuality and sexual health from the British Association of Sexual Health and HIV. Her career has revolved around policy, social and behavior change communication, public health, gender, and human rights. Madu, thank you so very much for taking the time, and we look forward to your presentation. It is such a privilege to host you. Before I hand over to Madu, please don't forget to put your comments and questions in the public chat, and Madu and I will take them up as we go along. Over to you, Madu.
Thank you so much, Mrinali. Thank you to the British Council for having me, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I'm warmly welcoming all our audience to this discussion as well. So let me begin the presentation. And yes, so my voice for our equal future. And this is the theme for 2020 to commemorate the International Girl Child. And this year is very significant because it is the 25th year of the Beijing Platform for Action, or the anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, where we discussed women's rights as human rights. So moving on, in this discussion, what I'm hoping to do is to see how young people can join this conversation and find different entry points where they can come and make a positive change to the society. So I would like to say hello and good evening to everyone. Those who are unfortunately not being able to see me or who are visually impaired, and those who are hearing impaired, I am trying my level best to make sure that both groups or both younger population are being able to access this conversation. Although I know we are not fully accessible, I am making every effort to make sure that the next 20 minutes or so you would be able to communicate or hear me out. So like I say, I am happy to join this journey because I think every journey has the potential to make a difference. And in this, I would like to invite all of you to come with me on this journey in search of great stopovers. And on the way, we will discuss the changes we want to experience so that we can feel we are on our way to our equal future. So let's see how many we have to take on this journey. We have 1.8 billion between 15 to 24 years. That's young men and women. And then we have more than 50% of them being young girls. And if I give you a quick snapshot of where we are in this journey, the global snapshot, you can see that we, at this moment, the gender gap, how we can, the health and education gender gaps are actually closing, while the political and economic empowerment gaps remain quite large. So these are things that you can think of. Why is it that we have been able to address some of the aspects like health and education, but unfortunately, in terms of making a significant change by being able to hold decision-making positions or places, because we all know that when you are economically sustainable or independent, when you have the opportunity to make your own decisions, that is where you feel that you can have an independent life. But in this scenario, still women seem to be not in par with men across the world. Moving forward, again, progress we have made. Yes, we have made progress in health and education, just like this slide says, 65% of the girls in terms of entry into secondary education and 66% of the boys. And then in terms of college admissions, 39% of women and 34% of men. But it also says that 20% of women are illiterate in 44 countries. But the challenges that are remaining or are obstacles in our path, this slide will tell us that only 17% or 17 heads of states, not even percentage, only 17 out of more than 149 countries that have been studied, only 17 heads of state. And then 18% are ministers, 24% are parliamentarians, 34% are in the managerial category. So now this shows how the gender gap exists across the board. Finally, this is the biggest challenge or the greatest obstacle that we have, the violence against women. And as you know, we say 1 in 3 women are physically and sexually violated. And in Europe, I have given some of the numbers here, but in Sri Lanka also, we are hoping to have our prevalence data made available so that people can understand what's the situation in Sri Lanka in terms of violence against women, especially in the domestic sphere. But we also know that women face a lot of violence in public spaces and in public transport. So all these obstacles are there for us to address and work hard in order for us to make a significant positive change in order to have an equal future. So can we clear the path by giving our voice for equal bodily autonomy? Now, how many of you must be thinking, do I have the right to make decisions around my marriage? Do I have the right to decide who I want to marry? And maybe also how you experience violence in day-to-day life, whether it's a catcalling or whether you, while you're traveling in your public transport, sometimes even in places, in office environments, or even when you go to buy something. How often people or young women have to be mindful about whom they are, who's around them. So this is what we talk about when we say equal bodily autonomy. You should be able to say that this is my body and I have every right to my body and that no one can make decisions around my body. This is also in larger sense, we can see through early marriage, sometimes through female genital mutilation in certain countries. Even in Sri Lanka, we have seen at various places that these are at different levels being performed. Again, it's a challenging process where young women sometimes are not aware that your bodily autonomy is something that a human right that you have and that you can have the right to own your body. Then equal access to employment and political participation is another place where people feel that sometimes more women are in employment. But at the same time, when we think of in a country like Sri Lanka, where we see more women in public spaces or public service, we see very limited number of females across the board are employed. So we say only 34% of females are in labor force participation. In terms of political participation, we definitely know that we only have very few parliamentarians, almost like 12 or 13 parliamentarians out of 225. So that definitely needs a change. Equal ownership. We still have issues around having land or property ownership in this country. Women are still having to fight in this 21st century to own their property or land. And then moving on, equal pay. If you think you are doing the same job and you're not being paid the same salary, then it's a huge disparity, but it is the reality. Again, another entry point. Equal before the law. How often when we talk about equality, that a lot of people misunderstand that equal before the law is the most important and paramount part in this conversation, because most of the time we see that women, because of the fact that our law hasn't been changed to suit our current situation, that women are subjected to so many discriminations within our own systems. So the systems, the policies which guide and ultimately give us laws and acts still discriminate many of the women's rights. So these are some of the critical areas that young women and young men could join us and find suitable entry points to make a positive change. So here's your chance. There are a few things that you can start working with either by yourself or with us. You can speak out. Whenever women and girls are treated with disrespect, that you have to make a difference, that you have to make a voice. And then spread the word. How do you spread the word? There's many, many opportunities for you to take the opportunity to spread the word that in every community, we must stop gender-based violence, violence against women and girls. Then how do you study about these aspects? I think it is extremely important that all young people understand the gravity of the subject matter that we talk about, whether it's sexual and reproductive health, whether it's sexual and gender-based violence, whether it's having comprehensive sexuality education in schools. It's extremely important to be aware and be informed, and also make an attempt to study if you can. Shift the culture. This is the most important part when it comes to social norms and stereotyping, and sometimes the subjugation of women into so many different types of violence. So shifting our culture and creating positive impact, and then understanding masculinities and how patriarchy works in our own homes, in our own environments. So it is extremely important to understand these cultural aspects for us to work towards shifting them for a positive change or positive future. Finally, how do we provide support for survivors? This is extremely important because while we work on prevention, at the same time, we need to understand the world is moving. We cannot stop things just like that. So we have to have support services for all those who face violence. And at the same time, we also have to have those who have may not have faced severe violence, but also are in situations where they are getting discriminated or stigmatized. Where do they go for support? So we need to strengthen our support services as well. So finally, what I would like to say is these points were brought in for you to think and ask whatever the questions that you feel you want to ask in terms of how you want to join in this conversation to make your voice heard to have an equal future. So remember, it's not about the destination, it's all about the journey that matters. Start early and you will realize, just like life, success too is not a destination, but a journey with an idea to make change. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madhu. Actually, there's a comment that says, I think people could not read some of the very small font on your presentation.
Oh,
But
I
I think,
see.
no, but that's
We can
fine
share.
because I think, yeah, and no, and we will also take it up and discuss because there was so much in what you said that I really, it's, if you don't mind, I mean, could we just elaborate on a few things? Is that okay with you?
Yes.
We were talking about the violence against women, and I think it's not just men who is violent against women. Women also can be violent against women. And sometimes when we talk about this, I'm very afraid that we alienate the kind men, the men who really care. I think when you say gender-based violence, I think sometimes if the hat, everybody puts on the hat. So how do we address this so that it's more people can take it on board easily, without sort of alienating one gender against the other? How do we have that conversation? Because I think a lot of people make assumptions. The minute they see this gender-based violence, they think this is what it is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, Mridali, I think the first thing is when we say gender based violence, yes, why violence against women and gender based violence are somewhat, they are the same in many sense, but they also have a certain element of difference. Now, when we say gender, gender is not a binary factor. Gender is across, it's a plane. We don't know, because gender is a social construct. And then in that process, men are also, men do face violence. Sometimes if you take in a school, all boys school, certain boys face a lot of violence from other boys because of the fact that they may be not very boisterous, may not be very macho like, may be very quiet, very reclusive, or sometimes may be very effeminate. So it's also the stigma that is attached to feminine aspects. So I think we need to kind of understand when we say gender based violence, because the violence against women in terms of numbers are very high. And that is why that is separately categorized and being discussed so that we address the critical aspect of it. But having said that, we are not alienating the men and the boys who are faced with violence in day-to-day life. And that is a fact. That is a fact that unfortunately sometimes the law is also not permissible enough for us to support young boys who get raped. So definitely, yes.
thank you, Madhu, because that I think is always a query that comes up. And I really like these aspects that you talked about. That is about clearing a path and giving a voice. Um, this equal bodily autonomy. Before we went on air, we were talking about how women are sometimes portrayed in the public domain. I think you said some very interesting things, and if you could reiterate some of those things, I think it'll be good for young girls to hear it, because I think there is such a hard sell for young girls to sort of conform to a lot of things. There's the fashion side of it and the career side of it, and there's a lot going on for them. And
Yeah.
if you go back to
Yes.
that conversation, yeah.
Yeah, I think what I was mentioning there is the whole conversation around gender and feminism has somewhat alienated certain aspects in our society. And it has gone into a very educated kind of a field where we sometimes miss out. Uh, so that we have to, are we in this conversation making a level playing field, whether you are an air hostess, whether you are a model, whether you are working in any kind of an environment. And I was saying, like, whether you are a potato grower or whether you are a judge, your understanding about gender-based violence should be the same. It shouldn't differ. The challenge for us in Sri Lanka is actually one aspect of it is that how often do we discuss that these are across the board, and it is not just for one particular kind of jobs and not other jobs, or whether you are in a higher position or whether you are in a lower position. The process, sometimes the way you are being discriminated is across the board. But unfortunately, that understanding, or we have some kind of a class system kind of a process, sometimes I feel, when we talk about if someone wants to become a model, how do we look at them? Yes, we talked about women being objectified, women being in advertising or in advertisements. How do we look at that? And whether a bikini-clad woman is fine to be on a calendar. And for me, I think as long as it is your choice and you are aware that you are not being discriminated and your rights are not being violated, there should be that opportunity for every woman, just like any man, to make decisions. Women should be also having that same space. And also, if they are feeling that this is not right, they should have the opportunity to say no to it, or say, I did not provide consent for this. Apart from that, I think we need to have a much more wider conversation around this, because without marginalizing certain parts. Maybe it's sex work. If a sex worker gets abused, how do we look at it? We might think, oh, anyway, she was selling sex, so it's fine. No, it is not fine, because if it's something that you do to earn a living, and if that is your profession, then it should be looked at in a different way. You should not be getting violated while you are in your job. So these are some of the things I think we need to discuss.
They're difficult conversations to have because there are so many perceptions around it. But there were aspects of your presentation. The other one that I really wanted to talk to you about was equal pay for equal work. How do you prove to somebody that you're doing an equal job? That is always the argument that comes back to you. You can both be working at the same level, but they will still say, how do you prove this? So that, I think that has been especially in corporate places, I think that's one of the arguments that gets thrown at women. I don't. So. Sorry,
yes, I think. That's why I was saying I really would like the younger audience to read the testosterone Rex, the new T-Rex that we call. These actually publications are done by a psychologist called Cordelia Fine, and where she talks about the fact that we have we in the past, because of various reasons, maybe our neuroscientific evidence did not give us enough evidence to say that testosterone doesn't mean the man can make certain things better than the woman. But now, in today, 21st century, evidence says that there is no difference in terms of what we can do. So I think that is something that we need to inculcate in our systems, that if a man can do, a woman can do the same thing in the same way. Because sometimes when the brain discussion stops, we starts talking about the hormone discussion. No, the hormones are different, and we need to have testosterone running across the board to make sure that the humanity survives. No, then in that case we need estrogen also, not only testosterone. So I think we need to make as much efforts as we could to make sure that whatever men do, women can do too, as long as they are both exposed in the same way.
And that we get recognized and rewarded equally.
Exactly, equally. There's no difference about it. Yes.
But that seems to be still such a ceiling in so many careers and in so many places. So let's hope 21st century will give us, 25 years on, we're still having this conversation. I think 100 years on, I hope we are not going to be having this conversation. I'm going to move it to, when we were preparing, I was talking about role models. For me, Jermaine Deere and Nawal El Sadawi have really, they've opened my eyes in amazing ways. And I'm grateful to them. I'm sure you have women like that, who made you tread this path too.
Yeah, I mean, one particular woman, I have to say that my mother and one of my class teachers, Mrs. Shirani De Silva, were also very instrumental. But there was one particular woman in my life, I have to say, and I have said this also sometimes. If I go back, maybe when I was about 13, 14, I think this is during the Oslo Peace Treaty between Israel and Palestine. This particular woman said, the lady said, or woman, said, the peace was not a political ambition. The peace was a personal and human ambition. So that really struck a chord in me. And her name is Hanan Ashrawi, Dr. Hanan Ashrawi. And she was a English literature professor, but she was also the only female Palestinian Liberation Organization's spokesperson and one of the leaders. And yes, when you're hearing this, yes, for some people thinking, oh my God, yes, I mean, for me, and then I can remember she also said, when the peace discussions were to begin, she said, if we can face the bullets, that if we can face their bullets, we definitely can face their words. So, for me, I grew up after 1983 in the sense like, my majority of my life. After 9 years, I think I was probably about 10 or 11 or 9. I can't exactly remember. Yeah, I was 10, I think. Yeah. So with Hanan Ashrawi, I also can remember it was again another British Iranian journalist who really kind of, not took me by surprise, but the fact that she was covering the Iran-Iraq war and Iraq-Kuwait war. And she is Christian Amanpour. I really, really loved the fact that she was a very young journalist at that time. And from Britain, she moved to CNN to US. But so these two women actually, I mean, my understanding of peace and war, and I must say, I have always been an ardent fan of international politics, international affairs, and sports. So whether it's a swimmer, whether it's a gymnast, whether it's a sprinter, I loved it. From 1980 Olympics onwards, I'm a total fan. But apart from that, I think the political leadership. But right throughout my life, I think Dr. Hanan Ashrawi was an instrumental personality, and the fact that how we now want to look at peace. And for me, peace is that. Peace is very personal. Peace should be personal, and peace should be a human ambition. It is not a political ambition. So for me, in my work around social cohesion, or work around reconciliation, or work around bringing peace to societies, communities, families, it's all about a personal journey. So that's something that I really would like to share with young people. It's fabulous to have a role model if you can find someone. I mean, not that, I suppose I have now grown into those people also. And later on, I think in the last 5-7 years, I loved Christine Lagarde. I loved the fact that she held her position with so much of, dignity and aplomb, and all men coming after her, asking as the IMF chief. So these were some of the women that I could think of.
And I think young people today have role models of people their own age. I mean, they have Malala and they have Greta Thunberg, and maybe a little bit older, but they have Jayanti J. very
Yes.
I mean, I saw her walking this morning, very fit and very energetic. I mean, these are people who, and not, and I mean, nowadays people are so accessible because you can always go online and, you can hear them speak, and it's much more real. What do you think of, I mean, I was personally impressed with the with what Greta was doing. I mean, she started it all by herself, and she's autistic, and she makes it a point to talk about her autism also. So it's like too marginalized almost. It's a young girl and somebody who has a mental health issue. So, what do you think of? I mean, what do you think Sri Lankan teenagers and young children can take from that kind of example?
Yeah, I think they're fabulous young people, and for young people in Sri Lanka also, I think you need to find your passion, where your passion lies. That's the most important thing. What is the change that you want to see, uh, is something that you need to ask yourself, because you cannot be complaining about things without seeing or without picturing what the change is. I am somebody who used to, or even now, who romanticize of real change. So for me, reality is the romance, not the unreality. So I love to look at something real and romanticize about it to see how we can change it. And I think it is challenging because the change doesn't come overnight. But the fact that we are able to commit ourselves to go through that long haul, you are on board for that long haul to see the change, is something that you need to feel so passionate about. If the change that you want to see is your passion, then I think we can have more Malalas, more Gretas in our own country as well. But it's just that it's not part of your education, unfortunately. It's not part of your day to day, if it's not part of your day to day life. Sometimes you may miss out because you are running from one place to the other to achieve certain expected goals, which are very systemic. These are
Yeah.
not systemic things. So young people need to reach their souls to understand, how would I like to see my future? And if I want to see a equal future, where should I start from? Where does my passion lies? And I think that's the most important thing.
Yes, because I mean, I love the fact that it's not in isolation. She is pursuing something as huge as climate change, I mean, she's taking on a lot of people about it. And there are people who deny it also, and she's taking them on. But also tied into this whole climate change, I think one of the UN sustainability goals is uh, what's it called? It's about consumption. There was a specific word
Yes,
there was
the
responsible consumption.
responsible consumption. Yes.
And she says she practices something called shop stop. where, unless she absolutely needs something. I mean, for a 16-year-old girl who's probably bombarded with all the retail stuff that is out there, I thought that was impressive. And I thought these are things that other young girls can also sort of, I mean, you can practice this at a very small level and make a huge difference.
Definitely. I think, there are few things that we all can do. One is stop waste, whatever it is. Stopping waste is something that we all can do. Limiting our desires is something that we can start working around. I think, like you said, we are exposed to so many things every day in our life and so many new things that we are constantly being asked to change from one to the other, whether it's our clothing, whether it's our, equipments, whether it's our mobile phone, everything. So if we are conscious about wastage, we also need to think about how important it is for us to be limiting our desires and then recycling. How comfortable are we as a society to recycle the things that we can recycle? I mean, the challenge is that it's an innovative process. All these aspects are very innovative. If we can really think, what do I want to do with the clothes that I bought maybe 3 years ago, 5 years ago, with little bit of innovation, I am sure you can use it. Yes. So definitely, I think we need to promote that. I think young people can promote that. In the past, we in certain countries, you have charity shops, you have vintage shops. In the past, they were called charity shops. Now there are vintage shops. They are rebranded. We go and buy. We love it, but it may be second hand, but it's still fine because you like to be that. Extraordinary person. I think finding yourself, who you are, is also one aspect in all these conversations, so that you don't have to be the norm. You can be that extraordinary person or that different person, as long as you are contributing to the society for the betterment of the society.
And then that will give you a better position from which to demand a lot of the other things also. To demand the change actually that you want to see, because you already embody it to some degree. Yes, I wanted to ask you about that. And how do we unteach ourselves, and how do we unteach all the stuff that we have been taught and we continue to teach young girls? I think that's a big thing. It's not necessarily education, it is just the things that we know and we are made to know or made to learn. How do we unlearn some of those things?
Unlearning is the most difficult part. I mean, whatever the thing it is, unlearning is so difficult. But at the same time, I think there are few aspects that in life. One is our language plays a huge role in how we think. If we every day decide to speak positively, our world is going to look very different. Instead of asking, do I have food? Can I have food? Do I, from very little conversations where you begin with negativity, if you change it to a positive conversation, the world is going to look different. So that's one aspect that I would always tell people. Instead of start asking things in a negative format, ask it from a positive perspective. Then it will be easier. Other thing is, if you have a single narrative, make it multiple narratives. Because the biggest challenge that we have, the moment I say to you, there's an issue in Ethiopia, the picture that you get into your head is, oh my God, famine in Ethiopia and people dying of not being able to eat or having any food. But I may be talking about completely different thing. because Ethiopia, or the Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, is one of the leading capitals in terms of growth. So we unfortunately try to look at things in a single narrative. We must tell our children, we must, I mean, because I'm not talking to adults, because unlearning for adults is harder than unlearning for young people.
Yeah.
So if adults can attempt to do that, it's fabulous, because if you want to talk about gender, read so many different perspectives around gender. Read from the neurosciences perspective. Read from the psychology perspectives. Read from the psychiatry perspective. Read from the sociology perspective. Read from the anthropological perspective. Read from the literature perspective. You read from different perspectives. Just like every movie you see, depending on the narration or the person who narrates the story, our narrative changes. So we need to be able to be open enough for that multiple narrative. If I talk about Iran, there might be a very single narrative that a lot of people would know. But unfortunately, it hinders our effort to make a positive change. So the most important aspect, again, I think this is possible. I'm talking about things which are possible.
Yes.
Some things we might not be able to achieve in life, but these things are possible. And also, if you want to see the change, or if you are somebody who's picturing your change, bring in that conversation to your home. Bring in that conversation to your dining table. Discuss it within your home front. Have challenging conversations, because the other part is agree to disagree, or how do we negotiate. Unfortunately, we have lost the ability to communicate the difficult conversations, because we believe my way is the highway, or the way I think is the correct way. It is important for young people as well as adults, but if young people can bring in that and tell their parents, this is how I see about it, this is what my perspective about it, let's talk about it, why are you thinking about it like this? So then you can bring in those multiple narratives. You can bring in those aspects where you think, my parents weren't aware of these aspects, but I brought a lot of information and evidence, and they got convinced about it. So it's important to bring some of those things home, discuss, and be able to be open about it, and be ready for, I mean, not to fight, because I think the most important thing for young people today is to be at peace. In order for us to achieve peace, I strongly believe you need to be at peace. And being at peace doesn't mean you're completely zen. You've left your day-to-day life and you're meditating. No. It is how you view the world, and be able to have a conversation which maybe is challenging, which may be with the most opposing party, yet you can hold your stature and provide your information in the right way and come out with it. Maybe successful, maybe not, but ideally we would like to get it win-win. So if it's a win-win, that's the idea, not to defeat somebody and you win, but both parties win.
Yes, and I think one of the biggest things that as women we have to unlearn is this notion that we wait for the external world to tell us whether we are worthy, whether we are beautiful, whether we are intelligent. And I think a lot of young girls can benefit by just telling themselves they've started off by being beautiful. They don't need anybody else to validate that. Because that makes them so vulnerable to so many things, so many negative things, where they question their intelligence, or, if you're a pretty girl, you can't be smart. If you're a smart girl, you have to have, I don't know, glasses and be reading a book all the time. It's all of those little things that are not really told us, but that we are made to feel that we have to also leave behind and unlearn and sort of find our own.
Yeah, I think be who you are. Be identify yourself as that individual person. If each and every person can develop their own little brand, I think we that's what we need. We need for our future. We don't need, like blocks of bricks, everybody looking the same, because we are not in a mass production of one particular kind. We need people who do different things, who think differently at the same time. So, young women, I would say I am somebody who never succumbed to any kind of victimhood, any kind of victimhood, and I am not going to, because that's a pledge that I've made to myself, uh, and to see each and every day as a brighter day, a better day that I would work hard enough to make me feel that I've made a difference. I've made a difference, even if it's the tiniest thing. I
Yeah.
think if you can tell yourself, no, I did my work, I worked very hard, I have been able to achieve, even if it's the tiniest thing. Appreciate it, accept it. Sometimes you may not get it from somebody else, but be conscious about it and tell you, because this is a difficult time. We are at a difficult juncture across the world in our history also. So mental health is a huge thing that we need to address, which we sometimes forget, but among young people also. So always see brighter side of things. Everything, like we say, every cloud has a silver lining. I personally believe the more we be positive, the more opportunities that we will have.
Thank you, Madhu. Is there anything else you would like to add before we wind up? Any more last thoughts?
A last thought, in the sense, I would say, like, be the change you want to see in, because we're talking about equal futures. So I just want to tell every young person, if you want to make a change, be that change, just like Mahatma Gandhi said. So, there are many, many people that they could study, look for those things, learn, and reinvigorate yourself. Do some exercises if you feel you're bored. Do different things in life. Exercising or sports is a good way to learn and unlearn many things. So attempt to do those things, and I think you will be able to succeed in life.
And also not to measure success, I think, by how large something is. Even if it's,
Yes,
as you say, the smallest thing as getting up every day and doing half an hour of aerobics or reading a book, that is change in itself that you're doing. So take pride.
definitely.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Madhu. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you have a terribly, terribly busy schedule, and you're much sought after to speak at all sorts of venues. So we're very grateful that you took the time to come and speak to us and our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mrinali.
You're
Thank you so
welcome.
much.
And thank you to my colleagues at the British Council, and especially to Shamit, who always handles the text so calmly. Thank you, everyone. It has been such a pleasure. Good night.
Good night.